Oh, hey there. Have you been wondering what kind of discoveries archaeologists have made lately? Off the tip of my trowel, I can think of the first ever digital unwrapping and reading of an entire scroll from Herculaneum, an untouched Maya city hidden deep in the jungles of Mexico, 400,000-year-old Homo erectus teeth that are rewriting the story of human evolution, a lost World War II Japanese hellship discovered off the coast of the Philippines, a Roman mansion underneath the gymnasium of a high school in Rome, the first shipwrecks of the real Pirates of the Caribbean in the Bahamas.
You had up to 1,000 pirates, and they vanished with their shipwrecks, with their archaeology. Not one potsherd from this era has ever been found. How does a massive thin slice of the past just simply vanish?
A Stonehenge prototype, and new research on how ice could have helped bring the altar stone from Scotland to Salisbury Plain. A chilling 7,000-year-old mass grave of headless skeletons thrown in ditches, and remarkably preserved freeze-dried potatoes from the Inca Empire. These are just a few of the many discoveries that archaeologists made in the last month. Chances are they haven't shown up in your newsfeed, but lucky for you, they're all over mine because it clearly knows that I'm an archaeologist. So I've carefully chosen and researched the ones that I think are the most groundbreaking to share with you today. There's no pseudoscience, clickbait, or AI slop here, just real archaeology from the vast span of human history and all over the world, as well as a few cameos from my executive producer, Emma. If this sounds like it's right up your trench, keep watching and let's dig in to these captivating stories from our past. Also, because I always get this question, my shirt is from the British Museum and it is linked in the comments of this video if you want to get it for yourself. It is not an affiliate link. I will be presenting 10 discoveries today in chronological order, starting with the one that goes the farthest back in time. Our journey begins in China, where a new study of 400,000-year-old Homo erectus teeth has used a groundbreaking new method to identify a previously hidden family love affair that might still echo in your DNA. The exact relationships between early human relatives are still a bit of a mystery to us, as by the time that we find their fossils, their genetic material, which includes DNA, has mostly decayed and become unreadable. Until now. A paleogeneticist and his team in China have spent years pulling genetic clues from proteins locked inside tooth enamel, the hardest material that the body makes. Those proteins can hold onto their shape and signature for hundreds of thousands of years, long after the DNA around them has fallen apart. Okay, then I'm gonna put you down. However, getting at them usually means that you have to grind up a chunk of the tooth, which understandably is not really an option when you're handling fossils that are also irreplaceable national treasures. So the team has now developed a new technique of using a gentle acid wash that lifts the proteins from a tiny patch of enamel while it leaves the tooth's shape intact. The researchers applied this method to 6 Homo erectus teeth dating to roughly 400,000 years ago, and they come from 3 different locations across China. Zhoukoudian, home of the famous Peking man, Hexian in Anhui, and Sunjiadong in Henan. The first results that came back told them that 5 of the individuals were male and 1 was female, as there is a protein that turns up in tooth enamel only seen in males. This kind of detail is one that we barely ever get from fossils this old, so that in and of itself is really significant. Then the testing showed that all of the specimens shared 2 tiny genetic variants, even though they are from different sites hundreds of miles away from each other. The first variant has never been found in any human or primate on record. Its presence helps show that the teeth from Hexian were actually Homo erectus and not Denisovans, as other researchers had proposed. It makes this variant a kind of genetic fingerprint for identifying East Asian Homo erectus fossils apart from other human relatives, which is something that we previously were unable to do. significant breakthrough number 2. The second genetic variant had already been found in Denisovans, making it look like a uniquely Denisovan trait. Finding it here completely rewrites the story, implying that it instead entered the Denisovan lineage from late Middle Pleistocene populations related to Homo erectus, which coexisted with the Denisovans in parts of East Asia. And not only that, this variant still shows up today, appearing in about 21% of people in the Philippines, 1% in India, and 0.71% in Papua New Guinea, but not anywhere else. We have long known that Denisovans picked up some of their DNA from a much older, mysterious ghost lineage, whose identity has remained unknown. This study nominates Homo erectus as the leading candidate for that source. This new technique is still in the early stages of development, and the team behind it have stressed the need for more testing, but these initial results are incredibly exciting. This technique of reading molecules without destroying the specimen is a major step forward in tying together the broken branches of our human evolutionary tree. Next up on our time-traveling escapades, we head to the town of Vrabla in Slovakia, where a mass grave of 7,000-year-old headless skeletons is leading archaeologists to wonder if they are the remains of a Neolithic massacre. Occupied between 5,250 and 4,950 BCE, the site is one of the largest known early farming settlements of the linear pottery culture in Central Europe. It consists of at least 313 houses grouped into 3 neighborhoods, where as many as 80 of these houses were inhabited at the same time. One of the neighborhoods was surrounded by an enclosure ditch that probably served as a boundary, and in 2022, a unique mass grave of headless skeletons was found at the bottom of it. This is not the first time human remains have shown up here, as burials of skeletons both with and without their heads have been found here since 2016. But it is the first time that they have been found in both such a large group and without any grave goods, laid out in various positions that seem to imply that they were tossed into the ditch, which is what it looks like to my eye. 77 out of the 78 skeletons found were headless. The only exception was that of a child. Examination of the cervical vertebrae, which is the top of your neck, showed that they were often correctly aligned, and cut marks indicate that sharp cutting tools like knives were used to remove the heads as opposed to chopping ones like an axe. This suggests that sudden violent beheadings were not happening here, but instead they were intentional, skillful ones that may have been carried out after the individual already died of natural causes. How we interpret this grave is still up for debate. A massacre isn't out of the question. There is a huge amount of bodies, so that implies that there was a lot of people dying at one time, but was that deliberate human action or perhaps like a plague or disease? There are other possibilities for why the skulls are gone as well, like practicing headhunting, or perhaps having a skull cult or ancestor worship where you take the head of the dead and put it somewhere else. Being able to examine the heads would help us a lot in figuring out the role of violence in their removal, and the team are keen to try and find them. It may be that they were collected and displayed in the houses of the settlement, but nothing was visible on the geophysical surveys that hints at where to look for them in a more targeted search. It's also possible that the heads didn't remain at Vrabla, but instead were taken somewhere else. Now, it's key to note that burying people in ditches is not unique to the site or time and cannot be automatically assumed to be a way that, they're disrespecting the dead. But this combination of mass graves, ditch burials, and the treatment of the bodies does seem to be more prevalent around the end of the linear pottery culture, and has often been interpreted as evidence of a time of crisis and violence. Further planned analysis of the bones will hopefully give us more insight into the social and biological kinship and demographics of the occupants of the grave, especially when compared to the other burials that have been found on the site. It will allow us to answer questions like, were these people local to this region? Were they from farther away? Were they all related to each other? Were they coming from lots of different places? Hopefully, DNA analysis will be able to help answer some of those questions. And when that comes out, I will have more to report on this story in future. What do you think is happening here? Let me know in the comments. Rather appropriately for the month of midsummer in June, our next discovery takes us to the site of Bulford in England, just 5 kilometers away from Stonehenge, where 5,000 years ago, another midsummer solstice-aligned structure was being built. This once-in-a-lifetime find was unearthed during archaeological work in advance of building new Ministry of Defense housing for an army base. The team was led by Dr. Phil Harding of Time Team fame, who called it one of the best and greatest finds of his career. The excavation found 48 pits that were radiocarbon dated to around 2950 BCE, 500 years earlier than the construction of the stones at Stonehenge. Artifacts from the dig included pottery, animal bone, worked flints, and charcoal, suggesting that large numbers of people gathered here over a relatively short period of time. One of the pits contained an extremely rare disc-shaped knife, which was deliberately placed here, possibly as a symbolic reference to the sun disk. But the highlight find at the center of this story are 2 post holes for wooden poles placed 120 meters apart that line up directly with the rising sun during the solstices. To confirm this alignment, leading skyscape archaeologist Dr. Fabio Silva used reconstructions of the ancient sky, landscape, and horizon to show how the structure would have aligned with the solstices to within an accuracy of 1 degree. The site's proximity to Stonehenge, the finds, and this alignment have led the team to conclude that the site was a place for ancient people to celebrate the solstices before more permanent, complex monuments were built, making it a proto-Stonehenge, if you will. This discovery demonstrates that Stonehenge was not a singular creation. The alignment shows that communities were already engaging with both the summer and winter solstices in this area, centuries before the sarsen stones were raised. Rather than marking the beginning of a story, Stonehenge now more clearly appears to have emerged from traditions and practices with much deeper roots. The discovery will be the focus of an upcoming article for the newsletter of the Prehistoric Society and will feature in a major publication to come out later this year, which will be available for free via Wessex Archaeology's online library. Our next discovery on the list also centers on Stonehenge, and is focused on the megalith known as the Altar Stone, found at the center of the monument. 2 years ago, I interviewed Dr. Anthony Clarke on this channel about his work determining where this stone might have come from. Spoiler alert, northern Scotland. And since he just published a new paper on how it may have made the journey down south, I caught up with him again to chat about it. Let's dig in to what he has to say.
Welcome back to the channel. It's lovely to have you back since we spoke to you last time back in 2024 about your paper on the provenance of the altar stone at Stonehenge. Can you just give a quick summary of what the altar stone is and your original or your previous research on it?
The altar stone is the 6-ton boulder at the heart of Stonehenge. It's a flat-lying slab of old red sandstone. For the longest time, we thought that this old red sandstone came from Wales or closer in England. But my work in 2024 showed that it came from northeast Scotland, over 700 kilometers away from Stonehenge.
You've now decided to move on to looking into how it came from Scotland to Salisbury Plain. Can you tell us exactly why you decided to look into this next?
So we figured out where the stone came from. The next question was the how. And a few months after the paper in Nature came out, we were contacted by a team in England who were going to write a comment on our Nature paper. Nothing came of that comment. Nature decided not to go ahead and publish it. But we thought, hey, we've done this work. You've written your comment. We've written our reply. So why don't we collaborate on a paper going forward? So we used their expertise in modeling glacial flow and our expertise in provenance determination. And it really was a great collaboration.
In your paper, you talk about how obviously there's a couple different methods theorized for how the stone might have made this journey. Can you just briefly go over what they are?
In the Nature paper, we were quite dismissive of ice bringing the altar stone 700 kilometers south. We looked at the flow lines of ice during the last ice age, and they were all northwards. They would have moved any material even further away from Stonehenge. But this team in England looked at the more detailed flow constructions, the glacial constructions they were working on, and they said, no, hey, it could have been moved towards the North Sea and perhaps onwards to Stonehenge using via humans. So ice could have reduced the transport distance, but not humans were still required at the end of the day.
I'm not a geologist, and I'm sure most of the people watching aren't as well. How exactly do you go about modeling a glacier and its flow?
Chatting to the team from Sheffield Hallam University, they showed me that they use a mixture of mathematical models, climate models, and they also use decades of field work. They look at where previous glacial erratics have been moved. They look at glacial landforms. They look at sediment, and together that feeds into their really, really sophisticated model, which is then taken to supercomputers to model. And using that, they have quite detailed flow lines and glacial erratic pathways of how stones might have moved during the last ice age. And so we combined our expertise. I said it came from Northeast Scotland, detailed provenance work to point towards mainland Northeast Scotland, and then we gave it to them to model how it could have been moved southwards.
What are some of the challenges that were then associated with doing this work?
The topography, so the landscape of Northeast Scotland, is really variable. You know, you have loch, you have glens, you have really high mountains, and depending on where the altar stone came from can really control where it might have ended up. So if we look at the more southwards options in the Grampian Mountains, they could have gone quite far south towards Dogger Bank. If we favour mainland Northeast Scotland, Caithness, flow lines there are really going all northwards, further away from Stonehenge and towards the North Sea in Shetland.
So what exactly have you guys found in this new paper? How has that changed what you thought before?
Well, I thought no way could ice have moved the altar stone southwards, and really that is confirmed by our recent work. Mm-hmm. But if the altar stone came from some of the more southerly outcrops that it could have came from, could have been transported 500 to 700 kilometers towards Dogger Bank. Dogger Bank is now a submerged landmass in the North Sea. It's around 40 meters under the sea, but tens of thousands of years ago, it was exposed. It was a series of gentle rolling plains that Neolithic people, prehistoric people might have been on.
Dogger Bank itself, it was exposed during the time that roughly Stonehenge was built. Is that, am I correct in saying that?
No, not quite. So co-authors in the UK suggest it could have been an area where the altar stone came from originally, but in terms of the timeline, it doesn't quite work because Dogger Bank was submerged. Well submerged. Thousands of years have gone by since it was submerged by the time Stonehenge had started construction. So it does require quite an increasingly elaborate set of circumstances for it to work. You know, this stone had to be chosen, it had to be carried to then dry land, and it had to be revered for thousands of years, hundreds of generations to be in place in Stonehenge. For me, it doesn't work.
If I'm remembering correctly from our original chat, when we were talking about the different routes, there's land, sea, ice. And I think you were maybe more in favor of sea. Is that still the case?
For me, that's still the case. I think it's the most parsimonious way of explaining how the Stonehenge made it southwards. But I think what this study does show is maybe I shouldn't have been so quick to dismiss ice entirely. Maybe ice could have assisted the builders of Stonehenge, or at least reduced the distance that humans had to transport it. But no, I really think humans chose this rock and then chose to transport it hundreds of kilometers to Stonehenge.
Now that you've kind of somewhat ruled out one of the options, do you have any more further work planned? What's next for you and the altar stone, so to speak?
I think I'm gonna close the book on Stonehenge. I think for me it's quite a black hole of research. You know, the more we look at it, the less we understand in some ways. And I look to this amazing world of lesser known archaeological Neolithic sites in the UK that don't get the attention they deserve. I think of the Rudston monolith in Yorkshire, the Devil's Arrows, the sites all across Wales and Ireland. So I think I want to turn my attention and my technique to those and work out where they came from. And that might actually give us more insight into what ancient Britons were doing all that time ago. Was Stonehenge the anomaly? Was it really this odd one out in Neolithic Britain, or was this just something that ancient Britons did all the time? They chose their rock and they transported it a great distance.
Oh, well, that's a really fascinating line of inquiry to carry on to. I look forward to seeing more about your research.
What do you think? Was it ice? Was it people? Was it both? Let me know in the comments. Now, I know I always say that there's no AI in my videos, But that isn't necessarily true for our next discovery. But instead of generating slop, this time it's actually been useful in helping us read an entire ancient Roman scroll without ever opening it. For almost 250 years, the Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum has taunted archaeologists. Its library of scrolls is the only large-scale library from antiquity to make it, theoretically, into modern day. However, it's only survived the eruption of Mount Vesuvius almost 2,000 years ago by being completely carbonized. Essentially, the scrolls in the library have become little pieces of coal and are too fragile to physically unroll without completely destroying them. Hundreds of papyri have therefore remained sealed, their contents preserved, yet unreadable. Until now. The virtual unwrapping of the Herculaneum Scrolls was pioneered in 2015 by Professor Brent Seals at the University of Kentucky. In 2023, he opened his lab's imaging and software technology to the Vesuvius Challenge, a machine learning, computer vision, and geometry competition that awards cash prizes to people from across the world who help progress and develop the technology to read the carbonized material without ever opening it. Notable milestones achieved through this project already include the first word, porphyros, aka purple in ancient Greek, the first title, Philodemus on Vices, Book 1, and the location of Plato's grave within the garden of his academy in Athens. And now they've managed to digitally unwrap and read an entire scroll. This was done by scanning it with high-resolution X-rays, reconstructing the wound sheet inside the scroll, flattening it into a readable surface, and then using machine learning to bring out the faint traces of ancient ink. The scroll in question is known as P-Herc 1667. It is what survives of a larger scroll, as earlier attempts to open it by hand back in the 19th century and then 1969 and the 1980s destroyed its outer layers and left only the compact inner core preserved. The recovered text is a philosophical treatise on ethics, probably a work belonging to the Stoic school of philosophy. Its final preserved column names Aristocreon, nephew and disciple of the great Stoic Chrysippus, which, together with the language and the themes of the text, places it in a Stoic context and dates it to the 2nd century BCE. Because the papyrus is damaged, the readings are fragmentary with gaps where the surface has been lost. But even so, several passages like this one can be read clearly for the first time in 2,000 years. We will inquire into something, but we will not grasp it, if in some way we depart from ourselves and from our own nature. Even though it's not 100% complete, it is the first time that a preserved text of a rolled Herculaneum scroll has been read continuously end to end, rather than in isolated words or patches. Another virtually unwrapped scroll contained the words Philodemus on Gods, Book 8, revealing for the first time that On Gods was a multi-book work. The challenge, however, doesn't stop here, as this is just one scroll of many, an entire library of philosophy, prose, and poetry. And since this technology is built to scale up, every discovery contributes towards making the process faster and more efficient. I'm looking forward to seeing what the project reads next. I'm going to briefly pause this video to speak about its sponsor, Manta Sleep. Now, I have always valued a good sleep.
What's your favorite part?
Nap time. Even more so since I became a parent. So I jumped at the chance to try their silk sleep mask and pillowcase bundle, plus the accessory cooling pads that you can actually switch out into the mask. When they say these are blackout, they are not kidding. Here, let me show you. See? I really like how the iPads, the way that they're designed, doesn't put any pressure on your eyes, especially with the weighted cooling pads. The pillowcase is so soft and cool, which makes it extra appealing in a hot summer. So if you're looking for a nice wee treat to upgrade your sleep, head on over to their website and use the code InsideArchaeology for 10% off. Happy snoozing! Our next discovery comes from the center of Rome, just a few minutes walk from the Colosseum, where, in something that sounds like it comes straight from a movie script, students have stumbled upon an 1800-year-old Roman villa underneath their high school. This is not really that big of a surprise, as the headlines might have implied, when you remember that this school is located at the heart of the Eternal City, And historical figures like Cicero, Pompey, and Octavian/Augustus lived in this neighborhood. However, it is not well understood because much of the archaeological record remains buried underneath centuries of modern buildings and development. This school, originally built during the late 19th century as a missionary complex, is no exception to this rule. When it was built, early archaeological exploration of the foundation revealed part of a large Roman villa known as a domus, but there were no extensive excavations or further work. Instead, the domus's true size and condition was a matter of speculation and rumors for generations. So, of course, some of the students recently decided to secretly explore the passageways underneath the gymnasium and finally confirmed that an ancient, luxurious Roman home lies beneath their hallways. After their history and Latin teacher reported the findings to the Special Superintendency of Rome, archaeologists then spent months excavating the area earlier this year. Dating to the mid-2nd century CE, the house is impressively preserved with decorative stucco along the vaulted ceilings, floral wall frescoes, and even a detailed mosaic featuring irregularly shaped tiles that were popular with wealthy Romans at the time. An inscription left from when the building was first found in the 19th century reports that the home likely belonged to someone from the Umbrius family. Archaeologists hope to continue their work there in future, and school officials plan to eventually open the site to the public. Next up, we head to the Calakmul Biosphere Reserve in Mexico, where an untouched Maya city from 1100 years ago has been located in a remote section of the reserve, where dense vegetation and the absence of logging tracks has effectively concealed its remains for over 1,000 years. Researchers used airborne LiDAR technology to detect hidden archaeological features beneath the forest canopy, which revealed a settlement covering roughly 15 hectares. To verify the LiDAR findings, archaeologists then cut a 5-kilometer route through the jungle before continuing by all-terrain vehicles and on foot. This fieldwork has now confirmed the presence of a substantial urban center containing plazas, ceremonial structures, palatial buildings, terraces, and an extensive water management system incorporating wetlands and hydraulic channels. A pyramid-shaped temple rises more than 13 meters above the terrain and exhibits characteristics of the distinctive Rio-Bec architectural style, including finely crafted masonry, decorative facade panels, steep staircases, and upper moldings. A total of 14 monuments were documented, including stelae, altars decorated with iconography, and hieroglyphic inscriptions. Photogrammetry surveys were conducted to create detailed 3D digital reconstructions that were then analyzed by an epigrapher who identified several important inscriptions despite significant erosion to the original material. One of them depicts a decapitation scene in which a figure brandishes a blade or axe over a captive and records a date which corresponds to 849 CE, suggesting that at least some of the monuments were erected during the terminal classic period, shortly before the widespread abandonment of many Maya cities that is known as the Mayan collapse. Another monument features hieroglyphic cartouches and the image of a ruler adorned with an elaborate feathered headdress and ceremonial regalia. Its inscriptions contain part of a long count date that may place it in the late 7th century CE, potentially making it the oldest dated monument identified in the surrounding area. Named Mananbe, meaning there is no path in Yucatec Maya, what makes this discovery stand out is the fact that it was found intact and without any signs of looting. This find also adds to a growing picture of how vast and interconnected the Maya lowlands once were. Now we head to the site of Tambovejo in southern Peru, where archaeologists have unearthed 2 rare 500-year-old freeze-dried potatoes. I have included this story largely because I love potatoes. They are my favorite food in all of its forms. Fried, mashed, boiled in a stew, I'll take it. Potatoes are native to the Andes and have been grown there for thousands of years. During the Inca Empire, several hundred varieties were cultivated, some of which were bitter and needed to be processed in order to be edible. This was done by freeze-drying them, which created a product known as chuño. Early colonial documents inform us that these products were safely stored for an extended period of time in state-controlled warehouses, allowing the Inca to create huge volumes of food reserves to support their imperial projects. Chuño were made by repeatedly exposing the potatoes to extreme mountain winter night frosts, then thawing them in the intense daytime sun, and then trampling and drying them. Some varieties of potato would require several weeks of soaking after the first freezing. Tambo Viejo was one of several provincial administrative centers established by the Incas on the southern Peruvian coast, connected to each other thanks to the Inca Trail. In 2024, the team working there found 2 chuños inside a ceramic jar set into the floor of a building, probably used for storage. The chuños still had parts of their peels clinging to their shriveled surfaces and had been stored together with a broken piece of Inca pottery and a damaged spindle whorl. These everyday objects have helped date the potatoes to the 15th and 16th centuries. Called the bread of the people by Spanish chroniclers, chuños rarely survive in archaeological contexts. There is only one other comparable discovery, which is what makes this find so significant. The excavators hope to conduct chemical analysis on them to see where they were grown before making their way to Tambo Viejo, helping give us more insight into this often overlooked staple food of the Inca Empire. Okay, hands up if you love the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Actually, I think I'm probably going to end up watching the first one after learning about our next feature, which comes to us from Nassau Harbor in the Bahamas and takes us back 300-ish years to the golden age of piracy. Maritime and underwater archaeologist Dr. Sean Kingsley is here to tell us all about his team's work looking for evidence of the real Pirates of the Caribbean. Let's dig in to what he's found.
So I'm Sean Kingsley. I'm a marine archaeologist, explorer, and writer, director of Wreck Watch International, and we're on a mission to protect the sunken history and to promote the wonders of the seas. But right now, I'm the co-director of the New Providence Pirates Expedition, which is an amphibious mission on land and sea, trying to reconstruct the real world of the Pirates of the Caribbean. What I'm really interested in is the truth, what really happened. You know, you had up to 1,000 pirates in Nassau in the Bahamas, and they vanished with their shipwrecks, with their archaeology. Not one potsherd from this era has ever been found. How does a massive thin slice of the past just simply vanish?
That's a great segue then into your most recent work, which has generated some headlines across the world. Can you give us a brief background on the site of Nassau during the golden age of piracy?
So in the golden age of piracy, which was around, I guess, 1690 through to the 1720s, this small archipelago with hundreds of islands became home to the most famous pirates' lair in the world, Nassau on the island of New Providence. And you think of those household names, Blackbeard, Stede Bonnet, Calico Jack Rackham, Mary Read, and Bonham. They were real figures who chose to live in this actual place. When Governor Woodes Rogers was sent by the English to sort out the pirates finally in 1718, he saw 700 pirates gnashing their teeth and shaking their cutlasses on the shore. And smouldering on the shore were the remains of 40 pirate ships and prizes. That's 40 pirate ships from one moment in time. And it sort of all vanished. And Nassau, it started off as a supply base for adventurers who wanted to fish the wrecks. So all the Spanish galleons passed up the Strait of Florida. It was their highway between the Americas and Europe, and a lot of them went down, including the Nuestra Señora de las Maravillas with about 5 million pieces of eight. And everyone on their dog wanting to have a crack at that, but there was no supply base. So slowly Nassau became that base and a reputation for lawlessness in the middle of everywhere, maritime ways, but hidden away in a kind of catch-me-if-you-can way.
So you've already kind of illustrated or talked a little bit about why your team is and what your motivations are for this project, but how exactly did it get started and why hasn't it been done before? Like you said, there's 40 pirate wrecks just like waiting to be discovered. Why haven't we done anything with them yet?
I was absolutely flabbergasted that no one had gone looking for these pirate wrecks before. I was working on a project with Allen Exploration in the northern Bahamas, and they had a license from the Bahamian governments to look for the Maravillas, which was the Spanish galleon. I'd been advising on that scientifically. And when passing through the Bahamas, everyone knows about Nassau and the Pirates of the Caribbean, but apart from sort of Blackbeard's rum cake being sold to tourists, there's nothing. It's all simply vanished. And that was a real challenge. I spoke to some colleagues and said, well, where are the pirate wrecks? And colleague of mine who worked on this project, Dr. Michael Pateman, he said, well, no one's ever gone looking. So that sparked something in our imagination, and we went on this crazy journey.
And so then what have you found?
So there were a lot of challenges. Nassau's a huge place. At your desk, everything looks manageable. You can work out where currents and tides converge, and Silver Key, that would be a good place to dive. Maybe a galleon went down there, or Gallows Island. That sounds quite juicy. I imagine there are some wrecks around there. But once you get to Nassau, the place is enormous. You know, historians used to write in the 18th century that you could fit the entire fleet of the Royal Navy inside the harbor there. It's not Disney with a skeleton holding the steering wheel. As you know, it's like the foundations of a house on land where everything has been stripped away and you just got perhaps the lower course. We went low tech. I've been using robots down to 5,000 meters for a long time, but we went low tech, stripped it all back and just went scuba. We used local intelligence. You know, the harbor has been very heavily dredged, unfortunately, to accommodate these enormous mega cruise ships. You've got these riptides and hurricanes that just smash through the harbor. The riptides hit twice a day. So we ended up actually finding 6 shipwrecks, 2 19th century and 3 from the golden age of piracy. Some 20 miles east of Nassau in the middle of nowhere on a reef, we found this ballast heap with cannon, musket balls, a round stone, probably for sharpening swords on it. And it had a swivel gun on it, which is a kind of hallmark kind of ordnance the pirates used on their decks as a sort of anti-artillery gun to slice down enemies on deck vessels. So that was a very cool find. And you imagine in the Caribbean, infinite visibility. We're really lucky that the ships had ballast in them, because the stone functions as a sealing layer that seals everything in place. And I've worked on similar sites. And, if you get up and person very careful, you can find small finds and all sorts of interesting archaeology wedged in crevices there. So that is the reality that you're working with. And the fact that the footprint is so small means you've got to be, you really have to use kids' gloves with respecting this heritage.
Can you just illustrate a little bit more about why exactly this particular discovery is so significant?
In some countries like the UK and America, Italy, Israel, they've created master databases of their shipwrecks. They know what's there. Therefore, they can kind of say, well, that's important and that's not. And you can decide what you can save, because you can't save all of the world's 3 million shipwrecks. The Bahamas aren't really developed to that point yet. So this was a baseline study. Did anything survive? How important is it? What should be done with it? So we're feeding all that back to our partners at the Antiquities Monuments and Museum Corporation, just so they can figure out what is there and how to protect it.
What are you hoping perhaps to do next then, now that you've done this baseline survey?
Well, we've got these 3 shipwrecks. The most important is the wooden hull, which we discovered inside the harbor. We found a ballast heap, which didn't look very excited, covered with modern trash. And as we cleared to the side of it, this wooden hull started to appear at 1 meter, 2 meter, 3 meter, 4 meters. Surprisingly, incredibly preserved in the lee side of one of the islands there called Paradise Island. And that was built with wooden tree nails, which is a very early form of shipbuilding. Didn't use iron nails, they used wooden tree nails to bang them together. And the ship had been burnt, which was another hallmark of what pirates get up to. Pirates didn't keep diaries, so we don't really know what happened exactly. They certainly wanted to get rid of their evidence, and burning ships to the waterline was one of the ways of hiding their crimes. A lot of our work really was non-disturbance. We didn't excavate, we just recorded, made photo mosaics, site plans, sampling the wood, send them to the laboratory, and so forth. So there's a great deal that can still be done. We'd love to go back with 3D photogrammetry, make some 3D maps of these shipwreck sites, obviously excavations, try and get some more fine-grained data, pottery, etc., to home in more on the dates. And I'd really like to get an AUV, an automated underwater vehicle, which is a kind of drone, and just fly it up and down the harbor and map what's there. There's perhaps maybe up to 15 shipwrecks under the cruise ships, which is a very dangerous place where you're not going to be allowed to dive. So, we want to get that data, work out what it means. We've done a historical analysis of every single ship that was lost around Nassau. We know that 504 ships were lost in these seas, most of them post-date 1750. And we can start off ticking off what we think are later, what are from the pirate era. There's great potential for education, tourism, knowledge, and it's an exciting start to this project.
How much of the harbor you said how big it was? How much of it did you guys end up being able to work in? And theoretically, how much is it left?
I'm going to say we investigated less than 0.2% of the harbor.
Wow. Yeah. So lots of potential out there.
And you got to work with nature. We went in hurricane season, which wasn't the best. You got to hope for the best. We had 2 tropical storms, which got us off the sea. And then you've got to go where the visibility is. And actually, on many occasions, it's more like diving in the English Channel than it was in the Caribbean. Robots don't respect the weather. You can send them out and, they can do the dirty work for us.
You've mentioned a few famous names, but what are some of the possibilities, or is there like a particular pirate ship that you're perhaps hoping to find or be able to identify in the harbor one day?
Some quite interesting cats that were working around these seas. The psychopath Charles Vane, whose party trick was putting matches underneath enemies' eyes to scare them into telling them where the booty was hidden. He welcomed Governor Woodes Rogers to the harbor in 1718 by putting one of his French ships ablaze and sailing it into the English fleet. That must be down there somewhere. But I've done a lot of research, including a book called The Pirate King about Henry Avery of Plymouth in England. And Henry Avery is fascinating from many angles, including the psychology. Why does a pirate become a pirate? He stole a ship and went off to India, where he ripped off the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb's treasure ship, which was enormous, of $149 million of gold, silver, and precious gems. And then he came back to Nassau in the Bahamas, paid off the governor, and scuttled his ship, the Fancy. So somewhere in that harbor is the 46-gun frigate, the Fancy. And given that Henry Avery was the guy who lit the fuse and threw the grenade that started the whole golden age of piracy, that's a really iconic discovery. Now, the wooden hull that we found is the right period. It's a big ship. It's the right size. And rumors start to spread quite quickly that these guys from the New Providence Pirates Expedition actually found the Fancy. We'd have to throw an awful lot of science at it, but that is one possibility. And certainly the documentary, which we've been making alongside this project, Mystery of the Pirate King's Treasure, is also following in the footsteps of Henry Avery as a kind of a staging post, to dive into the whole story of the Pirates of the Caribbean. Could it be the Fancy? We'll have to wait and see.
Obviously, you have the potential for a lot more work to be done. And as you said, you're working on documentary and TV stuff, and you have your own YouTube channel following this whole process. Do you want to let people know how they can keep following your work?
If you're interested in pirates, or where is that line between fantasy and reality, and what's Hollywood's take on Johnny Depp real or just make-believe, head on over to RecWatch TV on YouTube, where Mystery of the Pirate King's Treasure. There's going to be 5 episodes. 4 are out right now. And in the 5th one, we're actually using 3D digital modeling and AI recreations to reconstruct the pirate town of Nassau using historical texts and pirate trials of what it actually looked like 300 years ago. So that's going to be a pretty spectacular finale.
Have to add it to my watch later list.
Thanks so much to Sean for taking the time to chat with me. And don't forget to head to RecWatch TV's YouTube channel to watch the full story of what they found. Our last discovery for June comes from the coast of the Philippines, where the wreck of an infamous Japanese World War II hellship has been found, marking one of the largest previously unknown resting places of Allied prisoners of war lost during the conflict. During the Second World War, Imperial Japan repurposed more than 130 cargo ships and passenger liners to transport more than 125,000 prisoners between forced labor camps across South Asia, with around 20,000 dying during the voyages. These prisoners refer to them as hellships because of the brutal and inhumane conditions endured on board. Because the ships were often concealed within Japanese military convoys, Allied forces, unaware that POWs were on board, would attack them as legitimate military targets, as was the case here. The ship found was named the Hofukumaru, and it was sunk on the 21st of September 1944 by an Allied torpedo. According to historical accounts, it broke in half and sank in less than 3 minutes, trapping hundreds of British and Dutch prisoners below deck. For decades, the vessel's exact location remained unknown, until the Hellships Memorial Foundation uncovered previously overlooked documents in both American and Japanese military archives. They then used the archival evidence to figure out that the ship had sunk more than 48 kilometers from its previously assumed location. An expedition of underwater imaging specialists and maritime archaeologists was assembled, along with a TV crew, to search for the wreck. They used sonar technology to identify an uncharted wreck and dove 48 meters deep into the water to catalog it using photogrammetry. This was then compared to the original blueprints of the Hofukumaru. Based on the wreck's size, cargo hold layout, mast positions, and the fact that it was split violently in two sections, it was concluded that this is indeed the wreck of the Hofukumaru. Divers also discovered human remains among the wreckage, underscoring this site's significance as a war grave. The find will be featured on the latest season of Discovery Channel's Expedition Unknown, hosted by Josh Gates, shedding new light onto one of the lesser-known tragedies of the Second World War. All right, everybody, time to pack up our finds and hang up our shovels. That's everything for this video. Which discovery was your favorite this month? Which one would you maybe like to learn a little bit more about? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video or subscribe to the channel before you leave. If you're feeling extra generous, head to the links in the description to either give me a Ko-fi donation, shop my shelf, Lego included, on Amazon, or buy some archaeology merchandise that's all been designed by me. Every watch, like, subscribe, and click helps my channel connect you directly to the source of exciting archaeological news and shows the algorithm that people are interested in learning about real archaeology. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure inside archaeology.